The bullet grazed Quentin Nolan's shoulder, tearing a path through his worn denim shirt, leaving a trail of crimson in its wake. He didn't flinch, didn't even break stride as he walked toward the saloon doors of the Rusty Spur, as if getting shot at was nothing more than a mild inconvenience. "You're bleeding," said Frederick Thornton, the town's banker, pointing at Quentin's arm with a shaky finger. "Wouldn't be the first time," Quentin replied, his voice as dry as the Arizona dust. It was 1877 in Redemption Creek, a growing town nestled between copper mines and cattle country. Quentin had ridden in 3 days prior, taking a room above the saloon and keeping to himself, speaking only when spoken to. His presence alone was enough to set tongues wagging tall and broad-shouldered with eyes that seemed to have seen too much for a man not yet 30. Quentin pushed through the saloon doors, ignoring the stares that followed him. The piano player faltered for a moment before continuing his jaunty tune. At the bar, Quentin ordered whiskey, tossed a coin onto the counter, and knocked back the amber liquid in one swift motion. "You ought to get that looked at," the barkeep said, nodding toward the bloodstains spreading across Quentin's shoulder. "Had worse," Quentin said. "Doc's just down the street. I'll handle it." Quentin ordered another drink, then took the bottle and headed for the stairs that led to his rented room. He was halfway up when the doors swung open, and a woman entered. Not just any woman, a doctor, judging by the medical bag in her hand and the determined set of her jaw. Felicity Dawson had been Redemption Creek's doctor for nearly 2 years, ever since her father passed and left his practice to his only child. She'd faced resistance. At first, a female doctor was still a rarity in 1877, especially in a frontier town. But she'd earned respect through competence and sheer stubbornness. "Mr. Nolan," she called out, her voice carrying above the noise of the saloon, "I heard you might be in need of my services." Quentin paused on the stairs, turning slowly. "I'm fine, madam." "That's not what the blood on your shirt suggests." Felicity approached the stairs, looking up at him with clear green eyes that brooked no argument. "Upstairs, now, unless you'd prefer I examine you here in front of everyone." The saloon had grown quiet, all eyes on the standoff between the mysterious cowboy and the determined doctor. Quentin weighed his options, then nodded curtly and continued up the stairs, hearing her footsteps behind him. His room was sparse: a bed, a chair, a small table, and his saddlebags in the corner. He set the whiskey bottle on the table and stood awkwardly by the window. "Sit," Felicity commanded, pointing to the chair. As he complied, she set her bag on the bed and began removing supplies. "Take off your shirt." Quentin raised an eyebrow but did as he was told, wincing slightly as the fabric pulled away from the wound. "Bullet?" she asked, examining the gash. "Just a graze. Who shot you? Does it matter?" Felicity's eyes met his, unwavering. "In my town it does. Your town." "I've patched up more people in this place than I care to count. That makes it mine in ways it will never be yours, Mr. Nolan." She began cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. "So I'll ask again, who shot you?" Quentin hissed as the alcohol touched raw flesh. "Man named Harlow." "Said I cheated him at cards last night, did you?" "No." Felicity worked in silence for a moment, then said, "Harlow's got a reputation for causing trouble when he drinks, and he drinks often. Notice that. This will need stitches." She threaded a needle. "It'll hurt." "I've been shot before," Quentin said. Felicity paused, needle poised above his skin. "And you're still too stubborn to learn," she replied, her voice softer now, almost concerned. As she began stitching, Quentin studied her face. She was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 25, with freckles scattered across her nose and cheekbones. Her hands moved with confidence, steady and sure. "What brings you to Redemption Creek, Mr. Nolan?" she asked, not looking up from her work. "Passing through." "Most men who are passing through don't get shot at by the locals." Quentin remained silent, watching her work. The pain was sharp but familiar. "There," she said finally, cutting the thread. "Keep it clean. Come see me in 3 days so I can check it." "I might not be here in 3 days." Felicity packed up her supplies. "Then I hope wherever you end up has a competent doctor, Mr. Nolan." She was at the door when Quentin spoke again. "Thank you, Dr. Dawson." Felicity paused, surprised he knew her name. "You're welcome. Try not to get shot again while you're in my town." After she left, Quentin poured another whiskey and moved to the window, watching as Felicity crossed the street below. There was something about her that intrigued him, her confidence, perhaps, or the way she'd claimed the town as her own. Quentin hadn't planned to stay in Redemption Creek for long. He never stayed anywhere for long. But as he watched Felicity enter her clinic across the street, he found himself reconsidering his plans. The next morning, Quentin was at the livery stable before dawn, saddling his horse, a powerful bay gelding named Rusty. His shoulder ached, but Felicity's stitches had held well. "Heading out so soon?" came a voice behind him. Quentin turned to find Felicity standing in the stable doorway, medical bag in hand. "Thought I'd ride out to the Peterson place," he said. "Heard they might need help with branding." Felicity looked surprised. "You're staying then?" "For a while," she nodded, approaching him. "I was on my way to check on Mrs. Peterson anyway. She's expecting next month." She set her bag down and gestured to his shoulder. "Let me see the wound before you go." Quentin unbuttoned his shirt enough to expose the bandage. Felicity peeled it back carefully, inspecting her handiwork. "Healing nicely," she said. "No infection. You sound surprised. Most cowboys I know aren't particularly careful with their wounds. I'm not most cowboys." Felicity's eyes met his, searching. "No, I don't believe you are," she replaced the bandage. "The Petersons are good people. George will pay you fair. I'm not worried about the pay." "Then why take the job?" Quentin hesitated, then simply said, "Man's got to eat." "Well, you'll eat well at the Petersons. Martha's a fine cook." Felicity picked up her bag. "I'm taking the South Road. It's the shorter way." It was an invitation, though not explicitly stated. Quentin considered it, then nodded. "South Road it is." They rode side by side under a sky that promised heat later but was now cool and painted with the pinks and golds of dawn. Felicity was a competent rider, sitting tall in the saddle atop a dappled mare. "How long have you been a doctor?" Quentin asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Officially, 2 years. Unofficially, much longer. My father started training me when I was 12. Unusual for a father to teach his daughter medicine." Felicity glanced at him. "My father was an unusual man. After my mother died of cholera, he was determined I would have the skills to save lives. He must have been proud of you." "He was," she said softly, "though he worried people wouldn't accept a female doctor." "And have they accepted you?" "Some did right away, others needed convincing. A few still cross the street when they see me coming." She shrugged. "But when a man's bleeding or his wife's in labor, suddenly my gender matters less." Quentin nodded, understanding all too well how quickly prejudices could dissolve in the face of necessity. "And you, Mr. Nolan? What's your story?" "Not much to tell." "I doubt that very much." Felicity gave him an appraising look. "Men who have been shot before usually have quite a story to tell." Quentin adjusted his hat against the rising sun. "Grew up in Texas, worked cattle, fought in the war, drifted west after." "The war changed many men." "It did." They rode in silence again until the Peterson ranch came into view, a modest homestead with a main house, barn, and several outbuildings nestled in a valley of golden grass. "I'll see Mrs. Peterson first," Felicity said as they approached. "You can find George in the barn, most likely." Quentin nodded, impressed by the efficiency of the operation as they rode closer. The Petersons had done well for themselves. George Peterson proved to be a burly, bearded man with a hearty laugh and firm handshake. He hired Quentin on the spot and set him to work immediately. By midday, Quentin was deep in the rhythm of ranch work, his shoulder protesting but his mind clearer than it had been in months. From the corral, he caught glimpses of Felicity as she emerged from the house and visited with the ranch hands, checking a foreman's hand that had been gashed by a wire fence, looking at a cook's rash. Her manner was professional but kind, her smile ready but not frivolous. When she finally approached him, the sun was high overhead. "How's the shoulder holding up?" she asked. "It's fine," Quentin replied, wiping sweat from his brow. Martha's put out lunch for everyone. You should eat." "I will. How's Mrs. Peterson?" "Healthy, though tired of being with child." Felicity smiled. "She's carrying low. It'll be a boy, I think." Quentin found himself returning her smile. "My mother used to say the same. She could always tell if a woman was carrying a boy or girl. Was she right?" "More often than not." Felicity studied him. "That's the first personal thing you've shared, Mr. Nolan." "Quentin," he said. "If we're going to be in the same town, you might as well call me Quentin." "Felicity, then." She offered her hand and he took it, surprised by the strength in her grip. "Enjoy your lunch, Quentin." As she walked away toward her horse, Quentin realized he was looking forward to being in Redemption Creek a little longer than he'd planned. Over the next few weeks, Quentin settled into a routine. He continued working at the Peterson Ranch, riding out at dawn and returning to town at dusk. He took his meals at the modest cafe next to the general store, occasionally sharing a table with the town marshal, a laconic man named Wallace who seemed content to let Quentin keep his past to himself. Felicity was a constant presence in town, rushing from one patient to another, her medical bag always in hand. Sometimes their paths crossed at the general store on the street, or when Quentin stopped by her clinic to have his stitches removed. Each interaction was brief but increasingly comfortable, a growing familiarity that felt dangerously like friendship. One evening, as Quentin sat on the hotel porch watching the sunset paint the town gold, Felicity approached, looking tired but satisfied. "Just delivered the Wilkins baby," she said, taking the seat beside him without invitation. "A healthy girl. Congratulations," Quentin said, offering her a cigarette which she declined with a shake of her head. "I don't need congratulations, I just caught her. Mrs. Wilkins did all the work." "Still, it must feel good bringing new life into the world." "It does." Felicity leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. "Though I admit I'm exhausted, been up since 4 this morning." Quentin studied her profile, the way the last rays of sunlight caught in her auburn hair. "You should get some rest." "I will, soon." She opened her eyes and looked at him. "Have you eaten?" "Not yet." "I'm starving. Join me at the cafe." The invitation surprised him, though perhaps it shouldn't have. They'd been circling each other for weeks now, these casual conversations gradually lengthening, deepening. "I'd be happy to," he said. The cafe was busy but not crowded. They found a small table in the corner, ordered steak and potatoes, and fell into easy conversation. Felicity told him about her medical training, her struggles to be taken seriously, her dreams of expanding her clinic. Quentin found himself sharing more than he intended, stories of his childhood in Texas, his years driving cattle, even brief mentions of the war, though he skimmed over the darkest parts. "You've lived quite a life already," Felicity said as they finished their meal. "And you're what, 28? 29 next month," Quentin corrected, still young to have seen so much. She studied him over her coffee cup. "Is that why you keep moving? Because you've seen too much to stay still?" The question cut close to bone. Quentin considered deflecting, as he usually did when conversations turned too personal, but something about Felicity's direct gaze made him want to be honest. "Partly," he admitted. "And partly because staying in one place means people start to know you, and that's bad because then they start to expect things from you, they start to count on you being there." Felicity nodded slowly. "And when you leave, they're disappointed, or worse." "What's worse than disappointment?" Quentin met her eyes. "Getting hurt because you trusted someone who couldn't stay." The moment stretched between them, heavy with implication. Finally, Felicity said softly, "And yet here you are, still in Redemption Creek after nearly a month." "Here I am," Quentin agreed, unsure what else to say. "Well," Felicity said, her tone lightening, "I for one am glad you stayed long enough to let those stitches heal properly." The tension broke, and they finished their coffee in companionable conversation about the town and its characters. As they left the cafe, the night air had cooled considerably, and Felicity shivered slightly. Without thinking, Quentin removed his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. "It gets cold quick once the sun's down." "Thank you," she said, pulling the jacket closer. It was warm from his body, and she found the gesture unexpectedly touching. They walked slowly toward her clinic, which had living quarters in the back. The streets were quiet now, most of the town already settled in for the night. "I enjoyed this evening," Felicity said as they reached her door. "As did I," Quentin replied, suddenly awkward. It had been a long time since he'd escorted a lady home. Felicity slipped off his jacket and handed it back to him. "Perhaps we could do it again sometime. I'd like that." They stood there a moment longer, neither quite ready to say goodnight. Then impulsively, Felicity rose on her toes and kissed his cheek. "Good night, Quentin Nolan," she said, a smile in her voice. "Good night, Dr. Dawson," he replied, his own lips curving up in response. As she disappeared inside, Quentin stood on the boardwalk, jacket in hand, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging, of possibility. It was dangerous, he knew. But as he walked back to his room above the saloon, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The following weeks saw Quentin and Felicity's friendship deepen. They took to having dinner together several times a week, sometimes at the cafe, sometimes at Felicity's small home behind the clinic, where she proved to be an adequate if unimaginative cook. "You should taste my father's cooking," she told him one evening as they ate a simple meal of beans and corn bread. "It was terrible. We ate a lot of burned food after my mother died." "At least you had someone to cook for you," Quentin said. "I was on my own from 16. Learned to cook on cattle drives, nothing fancy, but it kept me alive." 16 is young to be alone, Felicity said, her eyes soft with concern. "Not so unusual in those days. War took a lot of fathers, including yours," Quentin nodded, not elaborating. Felicity didn't press. She'd learned when to let his silences be, just as he'd learned to recognize her moods when she needed to talk about a difficult case, and when she simply needed quiet companionship after a long day. It was during one such quiet evening, as they sat on Felicity's small back porch watching fireflies rise from the grass, that their relationship shifted. Quentin had been in town nearly 3 months by then, longer than he'd stayed anywhere in years. He'd moved from the Peterson ranch to helping the blacksmith, who was getting on in years and appreciated Quentin's strong back and mechanical aptitude. "I heard Mrs. Peterson had her baby," Felicity said, breaking a comfortable silence. "A boy, like you predicted," Quentin confirmed. "George is strutting around like a rooster." Felicity laughed, the sound warm in the gathering darkness. "Good for them. They've wanted a son." "You delivered him." "I did. Easiest birth I've attended in months." She took a sip of lemonade. "I'm glad you stayed long enough to see it." The words hung in the air between them. Quentin turned to look at her, finding her eyes already on him, questioning. "I haven't made plans to leave," he said carefully. "But you will." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "Eventually." Felicity set down her glass. "Why? You know why." "Because you don't stay, because people might expect things from you." Her voice was gentle but insistent. "But Quentin, people already do expect things from you. Mr. Peterson counts on your word when you agree to help with the cattle. Mr. Harris at the smithy expects you to show up when you say you will. That's different." "Is it?" She moved her chair closer to his. "Or are you just afraid of different expectations?" Quentin looked away, out toward the darkening fields. "I'm not good at staying, Felicity, never have been." "Maybe you've never had the right reason to stay." When he turned back, she was closer than he expected, her face illuminated by the soft glow from the kitchen window behind them. Without thinking, he reached out to touch her cheek, his rough fingers gentle against her skin. "Felicity," he said, her name a question and warning all at once. She answered by leaning forward and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepening as Quentin's hand moved to cup the back of her neck, drawing her closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "I don't want to hurt you," Quentin whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "Then don't," Felicity replied simply. Later, as they sat side by side, hands intertwined, Felicity asked, "What are you running from, Quentin? Really?" The night had grown cool around them, but Quentin felt warm where her body pressed against his. For the first time in years, he felt the urge to unburden himself completely. During the war, he began slowly, I was a sharpshooter. I was good at it, too good. I killed men I never met, men who never saw me coming. He paused, his voice dropping. After the war, I tried to go back to normal life, but I couldn't shake the nightmares, so I started moving. New town, new faces, nothing to remind me of what I'd done. Felicity squeezed his hand but remained silent, letting him continue at his own pace. For a while, I rode with a group of men who robbed stage coaches. I never killed anyone, but I was there, gun drawn. When things went bad, I left, kept moving. He looked at her directly now. I'm not proud of my past, Felicity, and I'm not sure I deserve a future with someone like you. That's not for you to decide, she said firmly. We've all done things we regret. What matters is who we choose to be now. And who do you think I am now? A good man trying to outrun his shadows. She touched his face gently. But Quentin, shadows follow you wherever you go. Maybe it's time to stand still and face them. The truth of her words settled deep in his chest. For so long, he'd convinced himself that movement was freedom, that staying nowhere meant he could be anyone. But here, in this small town with this remarkable woman, he'd begun to feel like himself again, not the soldier, not the drifter, but the man he might have been if the war hadn't intervened. I don't know if I can, he admitted. You don't have to do it alone, Felicity replied. That night marked a turning point. Though Quentin returned to his own room, he carried with him the warmth of Felicity's kiss and the weight of her faith in him. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't just endless horizons and anonymous towns. The next few weeks were the happiest Quentin could remember. He and Felicity spent every free moment together riding out to visit patients on outlying farms, sharing meals, talking long into the evening. The town noticed, of course. Redemption Creek was too small for secrets, especially when they involved the town's doctor and the newcomer who'd somehow transformed from mysterious drifter to respected community member. You planning to make an honest woman of Dr. Dawson? The marshal asked one day as Quentin helped repair the jailhouse roof. If she'll have me, Quentin replied, surprising himself with the truth of it. The marshal nodded approvingly. Town could use more stable families, and Dr. Dawson deserves happiness. The conversation stayed with Quentin as he finished his work and headed to the general store. There, he examined the small selection of jewelry in the glass case, eventually selecting a simple gold band with a small sapphire that reminded him of Felicity's favorite dress. That night, as they walked back from dinner, Quentin steered them toward the small town square where a few benches sat beneath cottonwood trees. The evening was mild, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Felicity, he began once they were seated, these past months have been the happiest of my life, she smiled, touching his face. Mine too. I never thought I'd find a place where I belonged again, or someone who could make me want to stay. He took her hands in his. You were right about the shadows following me, but with you, they don't seem as dark. Felicity's eyes widened as Quentin slid from the bench onto one knee before her. I can't promise it will be easy, he said, but I can promise to try every day to be the man you believe I can be. I can promise to face my shadows instead of running from them. He pulled out the ring. Felicity Dawson, will you marry me? Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. Yes, Quentin Nolan, yes, I will. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her, feeling a joy so profound it nearly overwhelmed him. As they embraced under the stars, Quentin silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought him to Redemption Creek and the remarkable woman who had given him a reason to stay. Their engagement was brief. Neither saw reason to wait, and on a clear October day in 1877, they were married in the town's small church. Felicity wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her taller frame, and carried wildflowers gathered that morning. Quentin wore a new suit, his hair freshly trimmed, his face clean-shaven for the occasion. The entire town turned out for the celebration afterward, a testament to how quickly Quentin had been accepted into the community. There was dancing and feasting, speeches and well wishes, and through it all, Quentin held tight to Felicity's hand, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. "Happy, Mrs. Nolan," he whispered as they swayed together to a slow melody. "Completely, Mr. Nolan," she replied, her head resting against his chest. "No regrets about marrying a reformed drifter?" She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "The only thing I regret is not kissing you the day I stitched up your shoulder." Quentin laughed, spinning her in a circle. "That would have been forward, Dr. Dawson." "I've never been one to follow convention," she reminded him with a grin. Later that night, after the guests had departed and they were alone in the small house behind the clinic, now their home, Quentin held Felicity close and made silent promises to her and to himself. Promises to stay, to build a life together, to face whatever came their way as partners. 3 years later, Quentin stood in the doorway of their expanded home, watching as Felicity rocked their infant daughter, Emma, to sleep. The clinic had grown too, with a new examining room and even an assistant for Felicity, a young woman from back east who had medical training and had been drawn west by stories of a female doctor breaking boundaries. Quentin had purchased the blacksmith shop when old Mr. Harris decided to retire, turning his mechanical aptitude into a thriving business. Between the clinic and the smithy, they'd become fixtures in Redemption Creek, their lives deeply intertwined with the community that had welcomed them both. "She's finally asleep," Felicity whispered, carefully laying Emma in her cradle. She joined Quentin in the doorway, leaning against him as they watched their daughter's peaceful slumber. "She's perfect," Quentin said, his arm around Felicity's waist. "She has your stubbornness. And your compassion." Felicity turned in his arms, looking up at him with the same clear, direct gaze that had captivated him from the start. "Any regrets about staying?" Quentin shook his head, drawing her closer. "Not one, though I do have one confession." "Oh." "Sometimes I think about how close I came to riding out of town that morning after Harlow shot me." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "If you hadn't been so determined to stitch me up, if you hadn't called me stubborn. If you hadn't been shot before," Felicity added with a smile. "Exactly," Quentin kissed her forehead. "Sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected beginnings, like a bullet graze and a stern lecture from a country doctor." "Like finding home when you least expect it," Quentin corrected, leading her from their daughter's room to their own. As they prepared for bed, moving in the comfortable rhythm of longtime partners, Quentin marveled at the life they'd built together. The nightmares still came occasionally, but less frequently now, and when they did, Felicity was there, her steady presence anchoring him in the present. He'd spent so many years running, convinced that movement was freedom and staying meant vulnerability. Now he understood that true freedom came from having roots deep enough to withstand any storm, and true strength came from allowing yourself to be vulnerable with someone who saw all of you shadows included and loved you anyway. "What are you thinking about?" Felicity asked as they lay together in the darkness. "How grateful I am that you were too stubborn to let me leave," Quentin replied, drawing her close. "And how grateful I am that you were stubborn enough to stay," she whispered back, her lips finding his in the darkness. Outside, Redemption Creek settled into the quiet rhythms of night, and inside the Nolan home, a former drifter held his future in his arms, no longer running, finally home.